Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for January 5th, 2023. Today I'm going to take a look at the worldview of the neoconservatives, focusing on articles just published by two of the more prominent American neoconservatives. And what I think will be evident from looking at this is to get a sense of the complete craziness of this worldview, which asserts the right of the United States to use its military power to impose a neoliberal world economy. Now, in the classic definition of insanity attributed to Albert Einstein is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If you look at the results of neocon policy, especially since the end of the Cold War, with war after war, despite the spending of trillions of dollars, the slaughter of millions of people, and the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans and NATO allies in these battles, what's been the result? We have a collapsing financial system. We have a world moving away from the Anglo-American imperial order. So to argue that they have been successful is absolute folly. And yet they're calling for more and more and more of the same. Now, we're going to take a look at two people in particular, John Bolton and Robert Kagan. Bolton, you may remember, served in the Trump administration, but long before that, he worked with the Bush neocon crowd, leading advocate of every single war we've had during that period. He served as Trump's national security advisor, and as national security advisor, he sabotaged Trump's efforts with North Korea to achieve a settlement to the nuclear problem there. On January 2nd, he published an op-ed in the London Daily Telegraph in which he praises Japan's decision to double their defense budget over the next 5 years. And he compares this favorably to those in the West who he accuses of pro-Russian propaganda. Among those he accuses of that is Macron for suggesting that Russia might have some legitimate security interests that were threatened by NATO. What Bolton attributes that view to is, quote, Western weakness, unquote. And he said this Western weakness could still allow Putin to not only win in Ukraine, but extend his empire further. He said the Japan decision to reverse 60 years of non-offensive military capability will make it the third largest military in the world and is a necessary step to confront both Russia and China. He said that further, this will allow the establishment of a global NATO, which could include admitting, he says, countries like Japan, Australia, Singapore, and Israel. And of course, in Israel, they just recently reestablished a government of a leading neocon war hawk, Bibi Netanyahu, whose views are quite coherent with those of Bolton. Now, the other article is published by Robert Kagan, who's the husband of Victoria Nuland, the neocon war hawk who has a special focus on Ukraine. She was one of the people who coordinated the regime change coup against the democratically elected Yanukovych government in February 2014. She famously said it cost us $5 billion to pull off that coup. And she named the person who would become the new president, Yats, in a call that was intercepted that she made to the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Now, Kagan himself is one of the founding members of PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, which was the agency that basically staffed the Bush administration and its war policy in the period after 9/11. Kagan's article is in the January-February Foreign Affairs magazine, which is the magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations. And it's titled, quote, A Free World If You Can Keep It, unquote. Now, he attempts in the beginning to counter the charge that the wars that have been waged by the U.S. under the neocons of his stripe were not for, to counter the charge that they were for selfish interests. He said, no, it wasn't for selfish national security interests, but were necessary to defend, quote, a liberal world beyond our shores. In other words, anyone who would say that we're fighting these wars for American corporate interests, American prosperity, that's wrong. We're doing it for a moral purpose. And that moral purpose is to establish a liberal order globally. He said, for example, we fought in Vietnam, Iraq, the Balkans, Afghanistan, Libya, and again in Iraq. These were, quote, to defend and support the hegemony of liberalism, unquote. What does he mean by that? Well, free markets, deregulation, privatization, no sovereignty, the U.S. serving as a global policeman to defend the corporate cartel interests represented by the Western system. And he went on to say that this should be our policy toward Ukraine. Quote, the liberal world order will be threatened if Ukraine falls, unquote, the same line that Bolton has. Now, of course, this is in keeping with the role his wife played in the initial coup that took place in Ukraine. The two of them, Bolton and Kagan, have a radical interventionist outlook, which supports regime change coups, supports assassinations. Bolton, of course, was one of the advocates for the assassination of Soleimani, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard leader. And both of them are looking at China as the next fight. And this is why global NATO is so crucial to them. This is why the Japanese rearmament, this is the AUKUS agreement, and so on. Now, who benefits from these wars? We'll start with the 5 leading defense contractors, all of which fund generously the neocon think tanks: Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Lockheed Martin. Now, then add to that the global corporate cartels and their interlocking board of directors, such as the banking and financial firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan Chase, all the City of London banks, the insurance companies, the grain cartels. Note that Vanguard and BlackRock are working very closely with the grain cartels to grab up as much good land in Ukraine as Zelensky will give them. Big Pharma is also part of this, the oil and raw material cartels. All of them represent vested special interests that benefit from these wars, contrary to the argument that Kagan makes that it's not about making money, it's about protecting the liberal hegemony. Well, liberal hegemony means the anti-sovereign world in which a global cartel structure makes policy for the whole world. Now, these are the same people who talk on and on about a rules-based order. And yesterday in an interview with me, Helga Zepp-LaRouche made the comment that those who speak the loudest about the rules-based order have nothing to say about the Merkel-Hollande admission that they lied when they said they were pursuing peace between Ukraine and Russia with the Minsk Accord. But she said, more importantly, not only did they lie, but they violated international law. So much for the so-called rules-based order. And this is why much of the world is turning away from this Western system. There are 2 reasons why. One is it's crashing. But secondly, it was of limited value for the development of countries, because when countries ran into debt problems, the first thing they were told to do is slash their living standards, impose International Monetary Fund conditionalities to keep the flow of money coming to the international banks at the expense of the lives of the people of those countries. And that's why sovereignty is an enemy for these neoconservatives, because sovereign governments defend the interests of their people over and above those of international cartels. We're going to be holding a series of events in the next 2 to 3 weeks. They'll be listed at the bottom of the description section. You can sign up for them, participate in them. we have to make 2023 the end of the geopolitical order of the global cartels. We can't do it alone. We need your participation. So join us in this, and I'll be back tomorrow. Since it's Friday, I'll be taking your questions. So you can send them to me, excuse me, at harleysch@gmail.com, harleysch@gmail.com. And I'll see you then, and I hope you have some questions for me.